I apologize if you hear my cats or my dogs or see them in this video, but we're going to talk about Margaret Douglas. This happened during the time of Susan B. Anthony and other well-known female reformers that have great historical context. She was a white woman who was jailed for a month for violating an 1849 law prohibiting the teaching of reading and writing to freedmen. Now, this is before the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831. Little threat was perceived by teaching slaves or freed blacks to read or write. After the rebellion, literacy efforts were perceived with increased suspicion for fear that literate blacks might embolden slaves to rebel. In 1849, the Commonwealth of Virginia passed a series of anti-literacy laws that stated, if a white person assemble with Negroes for the purpose of instructing them to read or write, he shall be confined to jail not exceeding 6 months and fined not exceeding $100. Now, only one known prosecution of this law exists, and that is of Margaret Douglas. Much of her life is a mystery. She moved to Norfolk, Virginia from South Carolina with her teenage daughter Rosa after the death of her son in 1845. Although she did identify as Mrs. Douglas, it is unknown if she was widowed or divorced. She is recognized by her community as a humanitarian who cared for sick children and women victims of domestic abuse. She was a well-spoken, confident woman who described herself as an independent spirit and a superior workwoman, earning a modest income with her daughter's help sewing and embroidering vests for wealthy men. In 1852, Douglas learned from a freed black barber that he and his 5 children were illiterate. Thinking that anti-literacy laws only applied to slaves, she offered to have Rosa tutor his children at no cost. After teaching for a short time, Rosa enjoyed it so much that she stated she would rather do that than help her mom sew vests. With the help of the barber's family, the Douglas family announced that they were opening a school for freed black children in their home, and it would begin on June 1st, 1852, and would cost $3 per quarter per child. $3 in 1850 is worth $115.16 in 2022. Rosa opened the school with 25 boys and girls in a second-floor room of their home. She taught basic reading and writing, while her mother assisted in biblical and moral instruction. They were so committed to students and their families beyond academic instruction to the point where they often visited the children, took food to them when they were sick, and even cared for one ill child until she passed away. 11 months after the school opened, class was unexpectedly disrupted on May 9, 1853, when a law enforcement officer knocked on the door and insisted to access the upstairs classroom. Douglas described Rosa as being paralyzed and the children clinging in terror as they were all led like a flock of little lambs going to the slaughter on their way to meet Mayor Stubbs. Douglas explained that she was unaware that the law applied to freed black children and that she would close the school immediately. Seeming satisfied, the mayor dismissed her without bond, and although the case would be presented to the grand jury for review, she assumed the matter was resolved. 2 months later, however, she received a summons to appear in trial November of 1853. Since Rosa was a minor, only Margaret had the charges directed at her. As she waited for her trial date, she refused to discuss the matter with anybody or seek counsel. She was going to represent herself. In her boldly written memoir, Douglas described the morning of November 15th. She deliberately dressed to appear authoritative and carried a small red pocket Bible. In her preparation, she seemed aware of the elements of class, gender, religion, and race that were very much a part of her situation, all of which she would reference that day in her defending arguments. Upon arriving at the courthouse, Douglas informed the government-appointed defense attorney that she would serve as her own counsel. The Baltimore Sun, which was a local newspaper, described the sensation that was created when the intrepid female sat at the bar, a place reserved for those in coats and pantaloons. She called 3 men as her witnesses, all of whom were prominent wealthy men in the community and who are members of the Christ Church, where she and most of the students attended worship. Her line of questioning was to indicate that the church's Sunday school program had taught literacy to the same children she had taught literacy to, and therefore, if she were guilty of a crime, the Sunday school leaders were also guilty of a crime. Court documents revealed Douglas's words to her witnesses and also to the jury as being confident, bold, articulate, logical, and pointed. Though the men denied the teaching of literacy within the church, they were far from convincing. One claimed ignorance because that was a lady's job. He didn't have anything to do with it. Another admitted to knowing the children were literate because he'd heard them read the Bible aloud, but had no idea how they got to be literate, stating, when they came to the hard words, I allowed them to skip over them. You're just implicating yourself at that point because you knew they were literate and could read. In her closing argument, Douglas told the jury that she was not an abolitionist, was not acting on behalf of Northern instigators as accused by the press, had been a slaveholder herself, and would be again if so disposed. Now, she did speak of misery and distress of blacks, but she affirmed her loyalty to the South and its traditions, including that of slavery. She claimed complete ignorance of the law, stating, "Had I known, I would not have set myself in opposition to the law." She then went on to address a socially taboo topic, and by doing so may have brought on her guilty verdict, which was the cohabitation, sexual relations, marriage, or interbreeding involving persons of different races, especially in historical context, as a transgression of the law. After describing her own humanitarian actions to visit and care for Black families, she stated, "It is not expected that gentlemen will take the trouble to seek out a Negro hut for the purpose of alleviating the wretchedness he may find within it." Her subsequent statements clarified that her insinuation was that men indeed seek out Negro huts, but for another cause altogether. And this was her closing argument. "In my opinion, we have nothing to fear from the true-blooded Negro. It is the half-breed, or those with more or less white blood in their veins, whom I have always found presumptive, treacherous, and revengeful. And do you blame them for this? How can you? Ask yourselves about the cause. Ask how that white blood got beneath those tawny skins, and let nature herself account for the exhibition of these instincts. Blame the authors of this devilish mischief, but not the innocent victims of it." The jury deliberated for 2 days before rendering a verdict of guilty with a $1 fine. Now, $1 in 1853 was the equivalent of $38.55 in 2022. The long deliberation indicated that the decision may have been problematic, but the minimal fine, considering that the maximum could be $100, conveyed that the jury may have sympathized with her argument, her cause, or her condition as a woman of modest means. The judge set sentencing date for January and was not as sympathetic in his statement as he delivered it. Judge Richard Baker addressed many issues that were unrelated directly to Douglas's crime. For instance, Baker defended the institution of slavery and railed against Northern incendiaries, even though Douglas never taught slaves and had no connection to the North. "If you were of a different sex," he told her, "I should regard the full punishment of 6 months imprisonment." Basically, if she were a guy, he'd throw her in prison for 6 months. He went on to rationalize that a minimal sentence of less than a week would be inappropriate because this had been a case in which the question of guilt is free from doubt, and there are many facts and circumstances of aggravation. He didn't, however, say what that aggravation had been, since she had closed the school immediately upon learning her actions were illegal. So technically, the sentencing there shouldn't have even been a court case for this. Her sentence was 1 month in the city jail, where the jailer and his wife showed Douglas special care. After her release, they hosted her in their home for several days before she and Rosa moved to Philadelphia. In her memoir, she described Philadelphia as a place where we are now quietly residing, happy in the consciousness that it is here no crime to teach a poor child of any color to read the Word of God. The newspapers were not kind to Douglas. They described her as a dangerous white woman and an intrepid female. The Norfolk Argus, which was another local paper, said, "Let her depart hence with only one wish, that her presence will never be intruded upon us again." The Baltimore Sun, which also covered her trial, compared her to Lucy Stone or any other member of the strong-minded sisterhood. Now, in conclusion, evidence indicates that Margaret Douglas was a true benefactor to poor, ill, and disenfranchised people, both black and white. She was a bold, outspoken woman at a time when such quality in females was not appreciated as much as it might be now. There's no reason to doubt the sincerity of her intentions regarding the teaching of the Bible and morality to freed Black children. However, none of this evidence leads to the conclusion that she was a social reformer who intentionally acted to transform society. Furthermore, her decision to open a school for freed Black children seemed more pragmatic than altruistic. It was mutually beneficial. Her teenage daughter, who enjoyed teaching more than helping her mom sew vests, was able to contribute to the modest family income, while also contributing to the academic, religious, and moral instruction of the disenfranchised. While Douglas's story is interesting, a bit mysterious, and dramatic enough to merit a stage play or film if done in correct historical context, it is not enough to say that she was a social reformer. These are questions that you can consider and things you could dig more into of Margaret Douglas's life if you would like to learn more. Thank you.